Downed Stealth Rescue. Operation Black Veil. Date, October 17, 20XX Region, Eastern Balkans, a jagged, rain-slicked borderland where ridgelines bite into the sky and villages cling like secret scars to the slopes. Objective, recover and exfiltrate the downed stealth pilot before opposing forces capture him or the wreckage, deny adversaries access to sensitive technology, bring the men home. Prologue, Night that took a ghost. Rain fell in a hard, metallic sheet that night, turning the world into a smear of sound and steel. The stealth airframe, callsign Knox 1, slid just beneath the cloud deck, a black shape that should not have been noticed. The mission was surgical, sterile in its purpose: approach low, deliver a precision strike to a buried command node, then vanish. Inside the cockpit, Major Ryan Hale, callsign Spectre, felt the steady thrum of hours and years folding into a single moment. He had flown into storms before. He had been trained to be a shadow, to trust instruments more than sight. He trusted his jet. What he did not trust was the world changing in small, invisible ways. On the ground, someone had chosen to look where no one had looked before. A low-frequency radar, built from old parts and new patients, threw back an ink spot on a sea of noise. That small, stubborn dot on a battered screen was the hinge upon which the night would turn. When the missile cut through cloud and flame lit the left wing, there was no elegant cinematic arc, only the raw physics of metal meeting energy and the pilot's body pressed against the seat. The jet spun, alarms howled, and the sky tasted like iron. Spectre hit the ejection and fell into a black that felt like forever. He landed in a ditch, drenched, blood on skin, orange parachute billowing like an accusation. Around him, torches bloomed, men gathered, dogs yelped. The ghost had been seen. Part 1, The People Who Move in Shadows. Task Force Raven was not a name the world would read about in the morning papers. It was a stitched patch of specialists, each with a life that read like a map of choices and hard attention. Marcus Ironhand Cole, team leader, kept his face in the shadow of a ball cap, but his voice filled rooms. Former ranger and small unit tactician, he had returned from the kind of deployments that left a taste for absolute clarity. He believed orders should be short and that people needed room to act inside them. He had a scar across the knuckles of his right hand from a time when paperwork and a captured insurgent didn't mix. Daniel Doc Ramirez, the medic, carried his faith in the shape of small things: a rosary tucked in a tourniquet pouch, a pack of prayer cards in his trauma bag. He had seen too many bodies to romanticize war, but he refused to renounce mercy. Jason Ghost Ward, sniper and Overwatch, grew up hunting on the high plains. He could wait until the world forgot it was alive, then squeeze a trigger and make time snap. He had a way of making a joke in the middle of danger that left people laughing through the fear. Alexei Wire Morozov, EOD and demolition specialist, once defected from a different uniform to this work's gray spaces. He had an engineer's mind and a cynic's heart. He liked maps that showed where traps had been laid. Elijah Hawk Thompson, drone operator and communications warden, was the youngest, a prodigy of code who'd found himself translating pixels into life-or-death choices. He kept playlists of songs he would never admit he loved and hummed them into a headset while parsing drone telemetry. Each of them had been broken a little in selection and grown harder for it. Their training was methodical, brutal, the slow refinement of humans into a team that could respond without the flinch of doubt. They were professionals who had learned to make choices in the dark, and when the night came for real, they moved like an organism. Part 2, The Gear That Keeps Men Alive. Raven's kit was modern but not miraculous. They wore plate carriers and helmets cut to fit NVG mounts. They carried carbines with optics and suppressors, pistols, and tools tailored for wet hills and busted roads. Their drones were small and hungry for data, sending back narrow, flickering feeds. Radios sang with encrypted voices. What mattered wasn't only hardware but the way the team used it: smoke and movement, triangulated observation, timing. They trusted each other's competence and the sensors they had. The objective, reduce the risk of technology falling into wrong hands, sat behind the human calculation: get the men, get the wreck, get the hell out. Part 3, The Pilot's Pages, Excerpts. The notebook Spectre kept was small and waterproof, the ink cramped, the lines like a life boiled down. October 14th, pre-flight. I told Mara I'd be back. She smiled like it was a fact, and I let myself be tied to that. There is a comfort in promises. I checked instruments 3 times. It is a mechanical religion. October 17th, before strike. The clouds are a blanket. The target is a pin. They say it will be quick. I think of the last time I saw the sea. I think of small things. A child's kite. A loaf of bread. October 17th, after hit. I am on the ground. My ankle aches something bitter. Men with torches move like constellations. Dogs find scent. I remember a sky that was mine and how suddenly it was busy with others. If anyone reads this and I'm not around, tell Mara I kept my hand steady. October 17th, final on field. If you are reading and I am alive, say my name like it belongs to the world. Part 4, The Enemy, the Hunters. The opposing force was not a monolith. It was a braid of local fighters, militia holdovers, and intelligence operators who had learned to mask old equipment with new tricks. The battery that fired had an operator who would later tell reporters he felt like a sportsman. He had scored, he said, a shot that made his life proud. Another man, a former technician who taught himself to translate analog echoes into meaning, had spotted the spike in low-frequency clutter and stayed up to watch the night. Their victory was not by miracle but by the patient accretion of adaptation. They had learned, painfully, that modern tools could be countered with ingenuity, an old radar, a careful operator, and a will to look in unexpected places. They celebrated the plane's fall like hunters handing around a trophy. But within that moment of triumph lay other truths: television crews, men with agendas, desires to turn a battlefield event into a narrative that one could exploit. For the militia commander, the shot conferred legitimacy. For foreign intelligence officers, it offered data. The wreckage became a card down the sleeve of many hands. Part 5, The Operation Unfolds. When Raven received the sitrep, the clock snapped into focus. Iron Hand moved like a man who had spent his life trimming choices down to essentials. He briefed the team not with diagrams but with small, clear sentences: get the pilot, keep him alive, deny the wreck. They would move in two elements, insertion and overwatch, with Hawk's drones giving them sight and Ghost holding an arc of cover. They approached the valley under pre-dawn darkness. Rain turned into a fine mist. Hawk's Raven drone drifted above, and a stream of black and white frames filled the control screen, moving torches, the orange splash of parachute cloth, a line of trucks, dogs. Grid sweep pattern, Hawk said, voice steady. Multiple groups. Grid 3 has a push. Wire's hands weren't gentle when he set charges to splice a burned bridge's railings, but he moved with the efficiency of a man who knew what to break and what to leave. At 2300, the first contact came. A swept patrol had found a ditch smeared with the glow of a canopy. A dog had nosed it. Men shouted. Flashlight beams cut and cupped the dark. Ghost saw a silhouette moving near a path and took hold of his breath like a ritual. The bolt cracked and the figure folded cleanly into the wet grass. Silence hung for a second, then the valley answered with the rumble of response. Fire exchanged along hedgerows, the world turned into a flurry of small tactical choices: when to press, when to withdraw, which sound meant reinforcements, which meant a scout. Raven closed on Hale's position with calculated violence. Iron Hand counted steps in his head. Doc's pack was heavier than memory, his hands were steadier. They found Hale curled in mud, face scratched, blood on his palms. He looked at them like a man who'd been told to wait for a miracle and then saw it arrive. Move. Iron Hand said. No one argued. They pulled him to a shallow hollow and wrapped him like a bundle. The LZ was a clearing 40 meters wide and a world of potential death. Ghost set a small egress lane with suppressed shots, Wire rigged a quick demolition to deny pursuit through a narrow defile. The Black Hawk came low and fast, throwing a wind that tore rain into sheets. They sprinted for the bird with Hale between them, boots slipping on wet roots, breath burning in chests. A burst of tracer stitched the sky behind them. A militia machine gun opened up from a ridge, a desperate attempt to stop the liftoff. The Black Hawk's nose tilted up, and as the rotor wash swallowed the trees, Raven poured back fire. They were not invincible, they were a team that had learned how to buy an inch of time. The bird lifted into the black, carrying Hale and a handful of men. For a few heartbeats they were ghosts again. Part 6, The Cost. They landed at a forward arming base hours later. Hale was feverish but alive. He drank water and tried to joke, but a limp announced the night's truth. The wreckage, meanwhile, was a magnet. Fragments found their way into the hands of scavengers and soldiers alike. A single thermoplastic panel could be analyzed and discussed in labs and backrooms for weeks. News outlets that morning ran with the simplest headlines: stealth shot down. Somewhere in television editors' rooms, footage of orange parachute and smoking fuselage became proof that even the best machines could fail. Analysts whispered about low-frequency detection and the end of an era. Policymakers in capital cities started to shift budgets and ask new questions. On the ground, the militia commander posed for a camera and called himself a defender. He understood that images are power. Part 7: The Private Aftermath. Raven returned to its quiet rituals: maintenance, debrief, letters home. At debrief, Iron Hand asked for truth, nothing more. He wanted to understand decision points and ask how they might do better, not because he loved the machinery but because he wanted to keep men alive. Doc sat with Hale and smoothed the folded paper. "You don't have to be a hero tonight," he said. Hale smiled like someone who'd finished a sentence he had started and could not finish. Ghost wrote in his own small book later about the moment he pulled the trigger, about how it never gets easier to undercut a life, even a life that is the enemy. Wire returned gadgets to a box and watched them like a man who had touched what might become a key to a new contest. All of them lay awake in different rooms that night and listened to the rain and tried to separate what they'd done from what the world would say they had done. Public narratives flatten nuance, memory preserves it. Part 8: Press, Politics, and the Shape of a Story. The media obsession was immediate and loud. A crash that involved advanced technology is an event that invites 1,000 minds to the table. Some commentators framed it as a failure of stealth doctrine. Others whispered of espionage wins for rival nations. There were live panel shows with talking heads that spent hours debating whether silence was now an outmoded virtue. Governments that had been content to believe in invulnerability had to answer questions about spending, secrecy, and how to keep pilots safe. Iron Hand watched news cycles with the same stoicism he used in the field. He did not care for victory claims, he cared about the men who sneezed mendings in his face as pilots slept in infirmaries. Speculation fed policy. Senators asked for hearings. Opposing intelligence services smelled opportunity. The night's reality, a human being struggling in a ditch, became an abstract problem to be solved with budgets and committees. Part 9: Private Voices, Public Silence. Months later, music sometimes drifted from Hawk's headset. He reminded himself how small moments mattered: a call from home, a joke shared in a locker, a letter from a child that said only, "Be careful." Iron Hand took to walking the perimeter at night, not because the base needed it, but because it kept his feet in a pattern that made his head quiet. Hale returned to flying after months of rehab. He did not embrace the spotlight. He refused showy commentary. He went back to what he knew, not because he loved the risk but because he had learned, in the dark, how to accept that sometimes survival is a work of luck and team. Wire quit the field not long afterward and moved to a quieter life where his hands did not have to test the limits of explosive metallurgy. Ghost kept a small memento, a strip of fabric that had once been orange and now served as a reminder that a human is always the axis of any machine's meaning. Epilogue: The Quiet That Follows Storms. Operation Black Veil left behind more than a man who had nearly been unmade. It left fingerprints on the way wars are told. It altered lines of investment and rippled through reputations. In a small museum, months later, a charred fragment of composite lay under glass. Visitors stared at the black curve and read placard text written in neutral font. A schoolchild asked, "Is this part of the plane you shot down?" The guide smiled, and the world spun another turn. Back at the base, Iron Hand wrote one sentence in the margins of a report. He placed it at the bottom of the page, as if to make it harder to miss. "We brought a man home." That is worth the telling. And for some nights after, when the sky was clear and the wind was right, Hawk would take his drone up and let it hum among the stars. The small mechanical bird sent back a quiet stream of images, fields and roads and tiny fires. He thought of Spectre, of how fragile a life is, and of the 1,000 small choices that had made it possible for one man to sit and live another day. The ghost had been seen. The team had acted. The world had noticed. None of it erased the dark, but it made room for another truth: people will risk themselves for people. That, Iron Hand thought, is a kind of stealth, not the absence of noise, but the presence of fidelity. End.